Ladies and gentlemen, we shall start with panel session 1, Empowering Vulnerable Groups Through Access to Information and Transparency. I invite the moderator, Kishali Pinto-Jayawardena, Right to Information Commissioner, RTI Commission of Sri Lanka, to lead the panel. I know you're going to take good care of the timing and the panelists as well. We have a remote on the table in the middle for you to use for any presentations you have. It's very easy. There is a big button with an arrow to actually push your presentations. You can see them on the screen in front of you. Thank you very much.
Hello and good morning, everybody. Welcome to Panel 1, Empowering Vulnerable Groups Through Access to Information and Transparency. And I think really, to my mind, this panel underscores and underpins the entire objective of ICIC and the reason why we meet annually to discuss very strategic and very important areas of how we empower and how we enable vulnerable groups to access information. So taking forward the themes of the first introductory sessions, I think really two words in this session title is of enormous importance. One is empowerment. So what do we mean by empowerment? And what do we mean by social justice? These are words that we've heard time and time and time again. As a constitutional lawyer in Sri Lanka, this was the focus of the work that I did for many, many years. But then there are always issues in understanding what is meant by empowerment, in understanding what is meant by social justice. The second word that I would like to focus on in this session is what do we mean by vulnerable groups. As was discussed in the introductory panel in the morning, these of course include communities of ethnic minority, religious minorities. I think it would also include the inner city slum populations of the cities of the global north, as well as conflict-affected communities in the global south. And I think a very important focus and a common focus on which we should focus on is how do we do this empowerment, how do we engage in this empowerment across the board. And certainly from Sri Lanka, the country that I come from, where we have good laws, but very little practical implementation of those good laws, the right to information law in Sri Lanka has been a singular exception to the rule. For the last 7 years that we've had the right to information law being implemented in the country, our predominant focus has been the empowerment of vulnerable groups. And I think this is one reason why the law has survived and thrived in a country which has faced enormous challenges to the rule of law, conflict-based as well as economic challenges. So I would like to invite the speakers. We have 4 speakers with us today. Ms. Laura Neuman, who is Senior Advisor to the Carter Center. We have Mr. Abdul Malek, the CIC Commissioner of Bangladesh. We have Ms. Sabina Aliyeva, who is the Ombudsman and the Human Rights Commissioner of Azerbaijan. And we also have joining us via Zoom, Maria Gracia Antia of the Buenos Aires, the guarantor body in Buenos Aires to freedom of information. So let me just outline the time periods within which we will speak. The panelists will have 10 minutes each to speak, at the end of which we will call upon questions from the audience addressed to the panelists. And hopefully we will have a very vibrant, very constructive discussion on the issues that are ahead of us. So I will invite Laura to start the first session. And I hope the time would be kept 10 minutes. I'm very aware of the fact that we are running behind time. So we will try and limit the time period as well as we can. Thank you. Yes. Do you want the...
Is this on now?
You can take this, Laura.
Okay, excellent.
Okay,
Thank you so much, and thank you very much to the organizers. Congratulations on this 15th ICIC. It's incredible to be here with everybody again. For some of you, you've heard parts of my presentation, so I apologize. I'll try not to be boring and bring in some new examples, but I did want to note the title of this conference and also the importance, as you were saying, of putting this panel first. I think it really speaks to the relevance of assuring that this right is meaningful for all people and demonstrating the importance of really thinking not just about, and you all have heard me say this, not just about the elite, because the elite in our societies already have access to information. This right, this law is really to make sure that everyone, the people at the very end of the road, also have a meaningful right to information. So I don't know where my PowerPoint is, but hopefully, do I need to click something? Oh, I'm going to use up all of my time on technological difficulties. Let's see. There we go. So, excellent. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about the work that the Carter Center has been doing. As many of you know, the Carter Center is a non-governmental organization. We are led by, we were founded by former President Jimmy Carter and his late wife, Rosalind Carter. We've been working to promote the right to information for about 25 years. And some years ago, we identified that women were largely being excluded from the right to information, whether that was about promoting the right or as users of that right. You've all heard the story. I went to President Carter and said I felt that there was an inequity in the right to information, and he challenged me to demonstrate that, to prove that that was the case, because he understood that governments were not going to do things differently unless you had data, unless you could have that evidence. So we did a study at that time, about 10 years ago, now maybe longer, in 3 different countries, and most recently, and I don't know if the commissioner is here, we've just replicated it again in Sierra Leone. So we originally did it in Bangladesh, in Guatemala, and in Liberia. And we were able to demonstrate through 2,000 interviews, about 2,000 interviews, that women are largely excluded from the right to information for a series of reasons, ranging from socioeconomic and cultural issues to lack of awareness, lack of time, etc. But in doing this work, and we did some work, long-term work in those first 3 countries, we were supporting women in making requests. And in 2019, we held a conference at the Carter Center that looked at the political economy and looked at the issues facing women in the right to information. And at that point, there was a request that we tried to globalize this issue, that we bring awareness to the issue of women's difficulties and marginalized populations' difficulties in exercising the right. We had no idea what that meant. To do a global campaign was really beyond anything that we understood or how to make it meaningful. So at the same time, we ended up looking at about 1,000 requests that women have been making for information, and unsurprisingly to many, they were really requests to local government, to subnational governments. So while many of you here represent your national governments or work at the national level and are protecting the right to information in terms of national policies or requests for national budgets and those kinds of issues, for most people, for most women at least, and marginalized persons, while that information is, of course, important, what was more essential to them was that information that was so localized, information about their streets or about their electricity or about how to get their kids into school. So we decided to take this campaign, the Inform Women, Transform Lives, and rather than work at a national level, to really look at subnational governments. And we we ended up selecting over the course of the last 3 years to work in these 35 cities around the world, and we'll be adding more cities as we go along. And the goal of the Inform Women, Transform Lives campaign is to work with local governments. I mean, these are obviously big local governments. These 35 cities represent metro populations of 215 million people. And so we work with the mayor and their offices to identify services that exist, but that their target population of women and marginalized persons are not accessing because they lack information. And we're using information as that bridge. And so it's not really about women coming and making requests for super sensitive information. In fact, the information that they're focused on is some of the most basic, but it is the information that people lack, and that in this case women lack because because governments have not learned how to get out that information in a meaningful way. So just as an example, these are the themes. Each government, each local government, city in this case, selects its own theme. So we don't go in and tell them, you need to work on this issue or you need to work on that issue. We say to them, tell us a service that you have that is being underutilized because you don't think women have that information. And they select anything from, as you can see, economic empowerment to health and psychosocial services. Caregiver services is one that's been selected more recently, and municipal identification cards, et cetera. And really the impacts have been amazing. And I'm really interested in the fact that over the course of the last 25 plus years, people like Toby and Juan Pablo and Mukulani Dimba, who's probably online somewhere, and Darian Pavli, we've talked consistently about how this right is so critical as a linking right for other essential services. And we've said over and over again how good this is for public service as well, and for the public administration. And what I love about this campaign is that we've actually demonstrated that, and really, as I've said earlier, concretized that. So for example, economic empowerment, and hopefully Gilbert Sandug was online somewhere as well. But in Kampala, we worked with the local government. The city decided to focus on a grants and loans program that they had for women cooperatives. They were unable to give out any money over the last 2 years because they weren't getting sufficient applications. Through the campaign, they spent a lot of time letting women know about the existence of these grants and loans, how to apply for it, what the requirements were, really basic information, where to go, how to submit, and what they would need to do once they got the loans. They were able to get over 300 applications from women's cooperatives and give out $250,000 in the course of 1 year by being part of the campaign. In Guatemala City, they focused on health services, so there were women's municipal health centers or municipal centers. They had a 200% increase in young women coming to use their services because they were giving out just that basic information. In Bogota, in Colombia, they worked on caregiver services. They raised awareness of their caregiver services, so women who are in that sandwich position of having to care for their children and care for their parents, who are often outside of the economic services because of their caregiving, who they themselves need care. They were able to increase awareness of that from 20% of the population to 50% by just being really innovative and really intentional about getting information into the hands of those women. They saw more than 4,500 new women coming through to get those services. In Chicago, we worked on municipal identification cards. They had a 225% increase in the number of people, largely in areas of poverty and women of color, who were able to get identification cards. And importantly, a lot of the cities work on services for survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. In Nairobi, we worked with their administration. They had an increase to their hotline from 80 calls a month to over 700. I think that says a lot, both about the need, but also how important it is to get that information. And the greatest thing, well, one of the greatest things, and I won't take much longer, but one of the greatest things is that the agency responsible for working with survivors was named the second best agency in the country because of what they were able to accomplish by getting information to women. So it really does show the value not only for those people who need the information, but also the service providers. I wanted to show you a video that was done as part of the campaign. And I just want to give a trigger warning. This is about gender-based violence, sexual and gender-based violence. This comes out of the city of Birmingham in the United Kingdom. They have incredible services, but were largely not being used because women didn't know where to go. And so often it's just about getting the information, again, into the right hands of the women who need it the most so that they can access those services. So I'm going to show the video. It's about 1.5 minutes, and I might need help. Let's see if it's going. Can you guys help me run this?
Hello, Birmingham and Solihull Women's Aid. How may I help you today?
So I wanted to go off that, but before I do, well, let me just say that these are some of the murals that we do also as part of the campaign. So we, in addition to supporting our local government partners to identify information and identify ways to get that information into the hands of those who need it the most, we also have a complimentary small grants program for local civil society organizations, and we do a mural project. So in each city, we do a call for proposal for muralists to give us what they would see as the value of access to information, how they would depict it. And then it becomes part of living walls in the community, and they do community engagement. So the one on the left just is from Lima, Peru, and it says Inform Women, Transform Lives, and it's showing different ways that women get information. The second one is from Kampala. The top one, I'm probably doing this in the wrong order, is from Bogota, and the one on the bottom is Nairobi. So I'd like to conclude by just saying that your job as information commissioners is incredibly difficult. And so often I can only imagine how easy it is to lose sight of why you're doing what you do, because there's always pressures on you, and there's always people who are not happy because you spend a lot of time looking at complainants. And so if I can end by just saying what you're doing, and if you can amplify what the cities are doing, assuring that that's right is meaningful is some of the most important work I can imagine. And so I want to thank all of you for the work you're doing and invite you to be part of the Inform Women, Transform Lives campaign, whether you have a city that's working on this or if you yourselves want to be involved in your communities to share some of the lessons learned. I think that together we can really make sure that this is a meaningful right for all women and marginalized persons. So thank you again for this opportunity, and I look forward to talking to you more over the course of the next 2 days.
Thank you, Laura, for emphasizing what I think is really important, bringing the local into the national stage. And for your point, and I cannot stress this enough, that most of the requests that we get in our countries, I think as your experience has shown, has been relating to the most basic of services. And I think this brings us into an important theme in these discussions, the grave emphasis that we should place on voluntary disclosure, on proactive disclosure in our right to information regimes. There are things, particularly in South Asia, which is the context I come from, which really the proactive disclosure regime is extremely weak. And this is a facet and a matter that ought to be emphasized and brought forward in our discussions today. So next, may I invite Mr. Abdul Malek, CIC Bangladesh, to address the audience. Thank you.
Respected moderator, respected speakers, honorable presence in this room, and the organizer, Albanian Authority of Information and Data Protection, and as well as all ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. My discussion regarding empowering vulnerable groups through access to information and transparency. Our Act of Right to Information was enacted in 2009 in the month of May, and the Information Commission of Bangladesh started its work in July 2009 to make provision for ensuring free flow of information and people's right to information, to ensure empowerment, transparency, accountability, and good governance. The spirit that every citizen shall have the right to get information and the authority is be bound to provide the information. This is the main spirit of the law. And every authority shall publish and publicize their information, and which will be accessible to the citizens. And under subsection 1, no authority shall conceal any information or limit its easy access. And access required to provide to be a perceptual handicapped, there is also enacted there. We have some example of proactive disclosure for the vulnerable groups. You can see in the screen, there is a local government office in village level known as Union Parishad. Its budget is in the wall of their office building for easy access to for information where tax money goes. Another side, a lady and her son, beneficiary list of social safety programs disclosed in a vulnerable community that help to reduce corruption for its openness. Commission acts taken for the vulnerable group. At the latest time, in 28th May, just 7 days like this, we organized a workshop for marginalized and vulnerable groups where Carter Center was involved with us. And this picture shown, underprivileged members includes transgender. We invited them, and ethnic women from the hill districts of our northeastern region, Dalits, tea garden workers, and such others. And we work together for their information output. Actions taken by the Commission, we launched e-learning courses for the government officials as well as NGO officials regularly, developed a core group of obtainers from government authorities as well as NGOs and civil society. We have organized 735 information sessions targeting 60,300 participants in all over the countries. So far, it is going on. Facilitated to form RTI Act Supervision and Monitoring Committee at all tiers of the government administration. Starts from the ministry and down to the local government, lowest tier. Another points, introduced one-line hearing system during COVID pandemic, and we introduced award for the government authorities for pro-people performance as well as journalists who are working with follow-up information and other job. Imposed penalty and official departmental action against 110 information providing government officers. They are more or less senior officers, and also local government representative for not providing or giving hindrance, not complying with the act. Publishing newsletters and using national media for participating different groups, if people access to take advantage from RTI. For vulnerable group, there are provision for giving information to the people with special needs. Proactive disclosure under this act instructed, and we are going for massive and endless effort from outside for proactive disclosure all over the government authorities. Nearly 2 million authorities in our country. There are, in all level, 2 million, 200,000 authorities in our country. And for special needs people, they are going there. Ensure participation of marginalized and vulnerable groups in all its program at the community level. Ethnic minorities of plain and hilly areas, partnered with development organizations, civil societies, multi-stakeholder communities, working for marginalized women, children, third gender, Dalit, minorities, and other vulnerable communities to support their initiatives. Special emphasis on women access to information, especially marginalized. We have some success story here. From there, we collected 3 or 4. Say Dalit community, 71 application were they gave for to get the beneficiary list of old age allowance given by the government, and they got it. Miss Rahana, 28 years, a villagers of a remote area. She got information for income generating activities from the government side, and training she got for beautification and become owner of a beauty parlor, and which government gave her 12,000 taka of Bangladesh currency. And he became an entrepreneur, now he is an owner. Miss Salma, 24, she was married in the childhood and divorced later on. Father is a laborer. And he applied for government office for receiving training, and she got driving training and became driver of an organization. For application from distressed women, Januki Bala, the commission took action against the officer Upuzela, that is sub-district youth development officer of northern region, and we gave him 1,000 taka penalty, and also ordered him to give money as compensation during when we are giving the verdict, for giving cash taka as compensation. We have challenges, though everywhere is challenges, but vulnerable and marginal groups are not sufficiently aware of and which term the definition of information given in the Act. Low level of awareness, how information brings challenges in life and livelihood. Language, behavior, cultural and societal barriers are there also. Local government elected representative requires to take more mass initiative. NGO, civil society organization requires mainstream the Act in their program. Way forward, emphasis on proactive disclosure. It is very much important for us, and we are doing seriously. We are developing next strategic plan for 6 years, 2024 to 2030, where vulnerable and marginalized community are more focused. Communication strategy for Commission is developed. Constructive engagement with the assorted coalition. We are working. Networking enhanced with the CSOs, NGOs in growing inequality. Scaling up women access to information. Established monitoring supervision cell on proactive disclosure of information by the authorities. We are proposing for establishing a regional coalition of information commissioner to empower individual ensuring access to information in our South Asia or Southeast Asia region. This is as follow-up. We want to say information is right, it is not a privilege. And Bangladesh is committed to her people to achieve that right. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Abdul, for focusing on two of the themes in this session, in the morning sessions. First is, what are the primary barriers that vulnerable groups face to access information? And second, what are the strategies and initiatives that have worked in Bangladesh to overcome those barriers? So the next speaker that we have is Ms. Maria Gracia Andia, the chair of the guarantor body for the right to access of information, Buenos Aires government. She's joining us via Zoom. So I think, yes.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm going to make a presentation. Let's see. It's pretty early in Argentina, Buenos Aires, so I'm here like 6 a.m. in the morning. So first of all, thank you very much for having me. Thank you for National Institute for Transparency, Access to Information, and Personal Data for INAIDA, the chair of the Executive Committee. And thank you for the Information and Data Protection Commissioner of the Republic of Albania. I know that they're doing a great job. And thank you, congratulations for the panel and for the moderator. Thank you for having me. I will do like a more general presentation because I'm coordinating a group of the vulnerable groups in the ICIC, and I think it's interesting to see what is going on in the global situation. First of all, I think it's very interesting to think about that when we think about vulnerability, it has been associated with the concept of weakness, inability, or at risk. So it's very important to not reinforce the discrimination and to think that it's more appropriate to think about, to use the terms groups in situations of vulnerability. So which has more dynamic and tangible character of the situation for its transformation. When we think about the groups in situation of vulnerability, we think about groups and communities that experience discrimination and exclusion, social, political, and economics, because are unequal power relationships across economic, political, social, or cultural dimensions. They are deprived of the enjoyment of the exercise of their fundamental rights and lack the attention and satisfaction of their specific needs. So what is going on when we think about of those groups? There are some socioeconomic factors that are disparities and one of the main sources of vulnerability. There are some social or political factors. The source of vulnerability primarily impacts migrants, refugees, and political exiles. Sometimes are health conditions. Social vulnerability can also result from health conditions or disabilities, age range, and maybe the vulnerability factor is older or younger, gender and diversity, womanhood and LGBTQ community, and race and ethnicity. Also, we have vulnerabilities when we talk about religious or cultural minorities, and belonging to a minority religion or cultural may indeed represent a source of social vulnerability. And violence victimization, when we think about gender or conflict with law, with social vulnerability may be linked to being a person that is or has been in a conflict with law. When we think about, and we have been doing a very interesting works in the ICIC and around the world with all the members, what are the groups that we consider in the situation of vulnerability? Well, here, a very interesting graph, but there are some of them that are in the top, like people with disabilities, children and adolescents, people living in poverty, elderly, migrant and refugees, political exiles, and gender violence and domestic abuse victims. So there are so many groups that they are that they have in the vulnerable situation, but those are, we consider that maybe along the world, they are in the top. When we think about, and Laura mentioned, and our colleague before mentioned, the very important idea of right of every person to the right to information. And think about that the right to information is not just from the people that they are in a social class that they can access, but also and especially because it's an instrumental right, is for those who are in vulnerable situation. It is the only way that they, through the knowledge of human rights, as there are means of the exercise that only can effectively access to their full enjoyment and fulfillment of other rights. If we consider that along the world, we have so many international instruments referring to specific groups that are in the vulnerable situation, International Convention of Human Rights with People with Disabilities, in United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People, Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, United Conventions of the Rights of Migrants, and so on. So racial discrimination, rights of the child, human rights of older people, Georgia Carta principles that LGBT community, Escazú agreement related with environment issues. So we have like very interesting like normative global situation that we consider that those groups will have to be in the focus of the information rights. Also in Latin America, we have the Inter-American Model Law that they put focus on this idea of gender perspective of vulnerable groups, and the idea, what does it focus? The guarantor bodies. As my colleagues mentioned before, what are the roles of the guarantor bodies in the obligation of guaranteeing their rights? So we have to put the focus on gender perspective, incorporate this approach from its design, from the law, and also from the implementation of the law, and the vulnerable groups or the groups in vulnerable situation. How? Putting the effort on the criteria of accessibility and using the methodology of focused transparency. Those are very interesting tools to help or to guarantee from the guarantor bodies the right to information to vulnerable groups. Here is very interesting what we found in the diagnosis in 2002 in the work that we have been doing, the ICIC, and which of the groups identified as vulnerable groups face to the greatest difficulties. So there were so many groups mentioned in that survey, but we have here like the top three: people living in poverty, people with disabilities, and rural population. And also, what are the main challenges facing for the vulnerable groups members in exercising their access to the right to the information? Lack of knowledge, that is very important. They have to know that they have the right to the access to information, the access to services, the access to their daily problems that Lara mentions at the beginning in the work that the Carter Foundation did. Accessibility, so I have to know that I have those rights. I have to know that I have to access to those services, but also I have to have the accessibility to that information. Maybe I am a disabled person. Maybe I'm a gender woman that live in poverty. Maybe I'm elder people that I have a very huge breach in the technology access and absence of the participation mechanism. So we can see what are the most challenges that those vulnerable groups they face in order to access to the information. In this idea of challenging exercise of the access to information for groups in the vulnerability, we mentioned that the lack of the evidence for the design of public policy, the lack of knowledge of the existence of those rights, the existing barriers of lack of technical resources for the exercise the access to information, and they achieve greater citizen participation through the public policy cycle of the access to information. So we have to know what those groups needs, what are their necessities. They have to participate also in the design of the policies. And lack of coordination between state and non-state actors. So we, the guarantors body, we have the responsibility also to work as a bridge between the people who work in territory with these vulnerable groups and also with the groups that they are the beneficiaries of these public policies. In this idea that in this diagnosis that we did across the world related with vulnerable groups in different countries through the ICIC network, we have been seeing that there are very interesting promising practices. So a promising practice is a positive practice that we can be considered as a model to replicate. Anyway, those promising practices, maybe they don't find some attributes that a good practices have. So we need to transform these promising practices into good practices in order that they can be innovate, effective, have an impact, sustainable, replicable, and multidimensional. In that way, we found very interesting promising practice that we can take as a model, that we can replicate in other countries, that we consider they are very interesting, that how they were designed. For example, one for all and one and all for one in the Brazil, training for lawyers in the Argentina LGBT Federation that we implemented that network and that workshop. Meetings with civil society organization of indigenous people with disabilities in Philippines. Physical access and electronic channels for women for consultation and dissemination of knowledge in Albania. That survey and that work, it was very interesting because it shows the importance of the groups that are vulnerable, the main challenges, the promising practices, but what we see in that interesting work, that some of those practices were just promising, but they are not good practices. They don't have all the attributes that a good practice must fulfill. But also in the design of these practices, there was a lack of the idea of monitor and evaluate the processes of those practices. So we have a nice practice, promising or a good practices, but also we need to see if those practices, they have an impact on these vulnerable groups or not. If we have to redesign those practices, if we have to analyze what we did right or what we did wrong. So that was very interesting to find in general that the guarantor bodies, we don't have a very good tools or mechanisms to evaluate and monitor the practices that we try to implement from our laws in order to find an impact in the territory. So we try to do this other idea of what is working related with
Maria,
the practices.
I'm sorry,
and the
I may have to interrupt you. We are a little bit going on constraints of time. Could you be able to wrap up in 2-3 minutes?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes. So this is just to let us know what we find. So if you consider the evaluation and monitoring processes were interesting or not, or were necessary, partially agree, and strongly agree. So everybody knew that is very important. But what are the difficulties to developing, evaluating, or monitoring practice? Lack of political will, lack of budget, lack of personnel, lack of documentation. We can see here what are the difficulties. Practices to promote the right to access to information. And we have here, like, they're monitoring some of them, the 50 of them, but no monitoring practice almost in the other 50. And what are the situation of the monitoring practices? Some are implementation, evaluation, some are trying to don't have the competence or don't have the resources. So going to the end and closing the presentation, what we have to consider related with vulnerable groups? Well, we have a very important role, the guarantor bodies, to promote understanding by sharing the importance of the practices that we have to put in the focus on the vulnerable groups. And not only the practices, but also promote the idea that those practices has to be evaluated and monitored in order to see if we have the impact in the groups that we are looking for. And also we have to try to find, to use a methodology that it is very interesting, that is focused transparency. So in the practices that we are going to try to recommend related with monitoring is the idea of training and awareness raising activities related with the idea of the importance of monitoring, increase access to evidence or knowledge, and better application in decision-making processes related to monitor and evaluate practices, and also to have the idea of additional information for designing effective and efficient public policies. And at the end, that we consider very important, the idea what is the role of the guarantor bodies in this arena. So we have a very important role in order to not just to guarantee the access to information, but also to implement practices that are evaluated and monitored in order to guarantee the access to information to vulnerable groups. So thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Maria. So the fourth panelist that we have, last but not least, is Ms. Sabina Aliyeva, the Human Rights Commissioner of the Ombudsman of Azerbaijan.
Thank you. First, I would like to greet all participants, and I also thank the organizers for the invitation to the conference and the opportunity to discuss this topical issue. This is well known that increasing the level and quality of the life of citizens is the main goal of the policy of a state of the rule of law, and this policy is implemented by ensuring the rights of people, including protecting the rights of persons with disabilities, the elderly, women, children, migrants, and other social vulnerable segments of the population. The Republic of Azerbaijan is committed to the principles of universality, the indivisibility of all human rights and fundamental freedoms, and ensuring freedom of information, which is the main component of human rights and freedoms. Sustainable development in this area is one of the priorities of state policy in the country. The Institute of the Commissioner for Human Rights, Ombudsman of the Republic of Azerbaijan, as an independent mechanism of extrajudicial legal protection, actively works in the field of strengthening and increasing the level of human rights protection, effective and timely provision of the rights of all social groups of the population, including persons belonging to vulnerable groups, as equal members of society, being based in its activities on the principles of openness, transparency, legality, impartiality, and in accordance with Paris principles. In the modern world, one of the most important issues is obtaining information and using it profitably. It's no coincidence that one of the main directions of the SDG is dedicated to ensuring the right to access to information. The UN Sustainable Development Goals assume global importance and are the guiding document for all states, including Azerbaijan Republic. Today, among the development indicators of states, ensuring inclusion is considered one of the main criteria. Implementation of inclusive development is one of the most important tasks facing humanity on a global scale. That is why the right of access to information must be ensured on equal terms for all segments of the population. Thus, according to the constitutional law of the Republic of Azerbaijan on Ombudsman, The Commissioner supervises the implementation by state bodies, municipalities, public legal entities, and their officials who are owners of information, of the obligations arising from the requirements of the law on the Azerbaijan Republic on obtaining information. We have achieved significant progress from the standpoint of protection of vulnerable groups and populations. The previous year, we have put forward important initiatives regarding widening the mandate of the Ombudsman in this direction, following the international legal norms. According to important amendment, the Ombudsman is empowered to analyze the implementation of government programs, strategies, national action plans, and concepts in the field of human rights, to provide feedback and recommendations to the institution carrying out monitoring and evaluation in the relevant area. This creates a successful country experience by enabling reforms and monitoring of implemented measures and accountability of institutions to the Ombudsman in terms of protecting the rights of vulnerable population groups. The recommendations the Ombudsman has presented at various times in annual reports and appeals to the relevant government agencies were put into practice in the preparation of state programs and action plans in the field of pensions, demography and migration, assistance in low-income segments of the population, and the provision of social and everyday services to elderly citizens and persons with disabilities. One of the proposals put forward by us was the adoption of a targeted state program aimed at continuing the education, housing, and employment of children raised in boarding schools and children deprived of parental care who leave them upon reaching their appropriate age limit. Every person, including those from socially vulnerable groups of the population, can contact Office of the Ombudsman and regional services centers in person, as well as via mail, online, email, and social networks. Also very important that during the COVID-19 pandemic, the Ombudsman, we created a special call center, 916, and it works 24/7. The Ombudsman and members of the NPM conduct monitoring and visits in the penitentiary, social service, healthcare, as well as physiatric institutions without warning. The situation of ensuring the rights of persons detained in those institutions, the possibilities of access to information are investigated and necessary measures for information provisions are taken. Printed materials related to obtaining information are distributed. 4 years ago, special department was established in our office to protect the right of access to information, which carries out activities to ensure the right of access to information, consider and respond to requests for violation of this right. Also, conduct legal education and monitoring in this sphere. Complaints about violations of legislation on access to information addressed to the Ombudsman are promptly reviewed and the necessary measures are taken. I would like to note that after the request of the Commissioner for the relevant complaint, the applicant's right to receive information was ensured. However, there are also cases when the information owner violates the law and does not provide the requested information within the time limits established by law, refuses to provide it at all, or provides incomplete information. Corresponding measures were taken against information owners who violated the right to obtain information using our mandate established in the legislation. Protocols were drawn up and the violated rights were restored. And this is a preventive measures from the standpoint of ensuring to obtain information in the future. According to the legislation of the Republic of Azerbaijan, the application of the administrative penalties does not exclude the execution of duties, followed by the application of that administrative penalty. Therefore, in court, decisions on the application of administrative penalties to information owners, in addition to establishing the appropriate fine, it is important to determine that obligation of the information owner to provide the required information. To prevent the emergence of negative situations in this area of access to information and create equal opportunities for the citizens to receive information, the Ombudsman also takes preventive measures, regularly conducts comprehensive enlightening events for various groups of the population and officials in the capital and also in the regions of the country. We prepare special videos, we prepare special educational brochures and share. Every year, the action plan for legal awarenesses approved by the Ombudsman includes issues of promoting and ensuring the rights of vulnerable population groups. And the result are monitored by holding events in every part of the country. Regional centers of the Ombudsman also actively participate in these events. In addition to above, an analytical analysis of requests to ensure the rights of access to information is carried out, as well as monitoring of the activities of official websites of government institutions to ensure access to information is carried out. The results of which are assessed, priorities in this area are determined, proposals and recommendations are put forward. From this perspective, this assumes high importance to fully develop the information infrastructure provided for by law in governmental bodies. Maximum organization and systematic monitoring of the disclosure of public information on internet information resources, securing accountability is also significant. Today, large-scale projects under the first state program of the Great Return to the territories liberated from the occupation of the Republic of Azerbaijan are being implemented in full swing. However, we have very big problem, mines planted in the liberated territories of Azerbaijan during the period of occupation are slowing down the process of the return of IDPs to their own lands and creating a serious obstacle to ensuring sustainable and just peace in the region. Despite the repeated appeals of the Azerbaijan Ombudsman regarding this problem, information about mine maps is still not provided. And as a result, many civilians become victims of mines. We once again call for accelerating the pace of demining the liberated territories of Azerbaijan. In the end of my speech, as well known, Azerbaijan this year will host the 29th session of the Conference of the Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP29. Carrying out our duties related to preparation for this prestigious event, we're realizing appropriate measures in the direction of educating citizens in the field of environmental rights and access to environment-related information. Thus, on October 2nd of this year, we will hold a symposium of ombudsmen serving to promote ecology and the right to access information within the framework of COP29 in Baku. We will be very glad to see our colleagues among us who wish to participate in this very important event. In conclusion, allow me to express the hope that as a result of our joint constructive dialogue and close cooperation, taking into account international standards and best practices, the most effective ways of solving problematic issues in the field of protection of the right to access to information of all citizens, including marginalized groups, will be revealed. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Sabina. I will not endeavor to summarize the presentations of the 4 panelists because we don't have time. I will open the floor now for questions and answers addressed to the panelists. We will take question by question and proceed. We have we are long past time, but we probably could be able to have 10 minutes for the questions and answers. We'll take one by one, I think. Maybe easier.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Julia Siklay from Hungary. And I would like to speak some words about the children. It's crystal clear that due to their age, they belong to the vulnerable ones. But we had a recent meeting with the European colleagues. That was the Freedom of Information Case Handling Workshop in Madrid, organized some weeks ago. And I asked the question from the colleagues whether in their jurisdiction children are empowered freely to submit a complaint to the supervisory authority without a parental permission or not. And in many cases, the answer was no, due to some formal procedural administrative reasons. And it's very strange that on the one side, we promote freedom of information rights to the future generations, and on the other side, they are not empowered to submit a complaint. So this is an issue I think information commissioners should pay attention to. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Would any of the panelists want to respond to this concern? Yes?
In Azerbaijan Republic, we have special hotline, as I mentioned, 24/7. It's open even for children. But it's not. We continue our work in this field. Nowadays, it's very difficult. Even if children want to call to hotline of Ombudsman, in any case, it's difficult. It's not possible. Sometimes just a second, I want to call. We prepare special programs, maybe special button on their watch or on their iPads, or we try to use modern technologies to protect their right to contact to ombudsperson. And when they contact us, we urgently try to solve their appeals. We listen them. But it's long way.
Yes.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank to our amazing hosts and all panelists for putting this issue on table, and I would like to bring more attention to one specific group. As we all know, in this moment, there are a few wars in the world. Unfortunately, we witness unimaginable atrocities, and due to that fact, every day there are more and more refugees and migrants, and very often these people are discriminated. They lack information to whom they can address if their rights had been violated, and I truly believe that is our duty, our human duty, to put more focus on these groups, on these people, to find a way to reach them, to help them, and to learn them how to use tools prescribed by law to protect their rights. Thank you.
It's more of a comment rather than a question, but I think we all agree with the spirit of that. Yes. Sure.
Sorry, I just want to respond to that. I'm not sure what country you're from, but unfortunately, in a number of laws, it actually only covers citizens and, in some cases, residents. But I think that is absolutely an issue that countries should be aware of. And you're right, as there's more migrants and displaced persons around the world, we need to assure that they have equal rights to information, especially if we believe it to be a fundamental human right. So I would really encourage all countries who still only provide this statutory right to their citizens to perhaps rethink that and see if there's some way to modify that so that all persons living within your borders and outside have that same right to information.
Yes, I'm from Serbia, and according to our law, anyone can request information. Doesn't matter it's citizens or foreigner or apatride, anyone can request information from public authorities.
I think that's amazing. In that case, much like I would say to Julia, perhaps you need somebody available within your agencies to support children, to support migrants, to support women. We did a study with UNESCO that looked at the percentage of women who appeal their denials, and it is dismal. There's reasons women are not making requests. There's even more reason why they're not appealing. And that's similar to children and to migrants. So perhaps having someone available within your agencies, within the ombudsman or the oversight bodies to support those appeals and shepherd those appeals through would be an incredible way to assure the equities that we all want to see.
Yes.
Thank you. But regarding refugee, I think there are classification of refugees because some refugees are forcibly displaced by the authorities or the government or somebody else. So all migrants are not refugees. The migrants are coming for their future establishment. It is different, but forcibly displaced by the authority, by the government, that is very important. Because in our country, we have 1.2 million of forced displaced people of Muslims, those who are Rohingya named. They are in our country. And we are trying to send them back, but it requires the government and other people's arrangement. They are agreed to take them back, but there are some risks also. So everything cannot be done within the defined peripheries. Thank you.
I just want to flag the point that in South Asia, we have been struggling for the last 10, 20 years on the issue of citizenship. Why should RTI laws only give the right to citizens? Participating in the drafting of the right to information law in Sri Lanka, I remember we argued for almost several days with the government to relax the meaning, not restrict this to citizens. And we quoted the example of the Latin American countries where even Mickey Mouse could file an application for information. And it was evident that the resistance of the state is so strong to extending the right beyond citizens that on that particular ground, I think we had to concede and we had to take a step back. And that, I think, is quite unfortunate. And the best example should absolutely and totally be to open the right to information law to every person. Thank you. So, any other questions?
Përshëndetje për të gjithë, përshëndetje në veçanti për Nikoqirin. Përshëndetje të veçantë për Nikoqirin në Shqipërinë, e cila ka organizuar një konferencë të këtillë në standarde të larta. Unë vjen nga Maqedonia e Veriut Dhe desha të prek një çështje me të cilën ne si institucion përballemi për vite të tëra, edhe përkundër shumë përpjekjeve që ligji për qasje në informata me karakter publik të shfrytëzohet më tepër nga qytetarët e rëndomt. Për fat të keq, më duhet të them se ligji më tepër shfrytëzohet nga organizatat jo qeveritare dhe jo nga qytetarët. Kemi organizuar deri tani disa fushata sensibilizuese, kemi organizuar trajnime për grupe të caktuara të interesit, siç janë nxënësit e shkollave të mesme dhe studentët. Megjithatë, nuk mund të lavdërohem se kemi arritur këtë qëllim. Si dukuri, a është e pranishme edhe në vendet e juaja, apo kjo ka të bëjë me mentalitetin e shtetit nga të cili vjen unë. Ndërkohë që vetëm si informacion se me ligjin ton, qasje në informat me karakter publik kanë edhe shtetësit e huaj dhe kemi pasur raste kur ky ligj është shfrytzuar edhe nga nënshtetës të shteteve të tjera. Ju faleminderit.
Would any of the panelists want to respond? Very briefly, we've run out of time almost, to the concern that was raised. Yes? So he talked about the fact that in North Macedonia, that the users of the right to information law has been more the CSOs as opposed to the citizens, and whether that has been the practice really in other countries as well. Speaking from Sri Lanka, I would just like to make the brief comment that one of the greatest joys sitting as Information Commissioner in Sri Lanka has been that the citizens have used the law to a large extent really than the city-based CSOs or the journalists for that matter, but they've acted as facilitators of the information empowering process to marginalized groups. But Laura, would you? Yeah.
So apologies, I wasn't actually able to hear the question directly, but if that is the correct question, I would just say that CSOs are citizens. I mean, they're made up of citizens, they represent citizens, they're there to support citizens. And often we see that for all the obstacles that we've talked about, individuals may not be able to make those requests on their own and need that community-based organization or that civil society organization to support them. So I would encourage you not to see CSOs as distinct from the citizens who are in need of those services and that information.
So I think we should wrap up the sessions now. I would just like to add a few remarks in closing, returning to the theme of empowerment that we raised initially. In Sri Lanka, which has been a conflict-affected country for decades, the very act of questioning government, the act of questioning the state has been empowering of and by itself. We see communities of women who have come out to question the police, question the security forces in terms of conflict-era abusers. And for them, the single act of questioning has gone far beyond anything that a normal law has given them. So whether, in fact, the information is released or not, that questioning itself has been the first step in the empowering journey. So thank you very much, and I look forward to good sessions during the 2 days. Thank you.